Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today at the webinar of Future-Proofing Your Career in Uncertain Times. My name is Helen Chen. I'm the Head of External and Alumni Relations at HKUST Business School. It's my honor to welcome you all to our webinar series. To ensure we have a smooth discussion, let us agree on some house rules. All participants are muted before joining the webinar in order to eliminate any audio disruptions. If you need any help or assistance, we recommend you to leave us messages in the chat room function, which is at the lower bar of your Zoom software. Our supporting teammate, which will have a prefix of HKUST in front of their name, will be able to help you. And during the first half of the event, we will have discussion between our moderator and our speaker today. And then we will have the session roughly until around 1:30 p.m. So please save your questions at the Q&A session. And if you like to, you can also send us the questions in the chat room and we'll collect them for our moderator to ask our speaker today. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator today. And I think a lot of you may know him, is Professor Albert PARK. Professor PARK is the head and chair professor of economics at the HKUST Business School. He is also the director of HKUST Institute of Emerging Market Studies. And Professor PARK is a development labor economist who is expert on China economic development. So let me invite Professor PARK to come on screen now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen. And I want to, on behalf of the School of Business Management at HKUST, welcome all of our faculty, staff, and students, our alumni and friends to this webinar. I don't think there could be a more appropriate time to be holding a webinar on future-proofing your career in uncertain times. I don't remember there being a more disruptive or uncertain period in recent history, not just in Hong Kong, but globally. We know that even as we continue to adapt to the disruption and uncertainty of the COVID-19 pandemic, we are also starting to look forward and trying to think, how is this going to change the world we live in, the types of business activities we engage in, and what types of careers will flourish in that environment. We know that in the post-COVID world, some industries will do better, some industries will do worse. We know that the nature of business will change with more emphasis on virtual marketplaces, digital interactions, marketing, work, and interaction of all types. And I think it's appropriate for many of us to reflect on, what does this mean for the types of jobs that will be there in the new economy? What are the opportunities? What are the challenges? And how can we start to prepare ourselves for this type of a future? We're very fortunate to have a great expert to address these issues with us today, Ms. Diana Wu David. Diana is an accomplished business leader, storyteller, and strategist. She's had a diverse global career on digital and business transformation spanning a couple of decades and over many continents in the world. She guides organizations to reset their mindset and to adopt a more agile attitude. Founder of the transformational organization Future Proof Lab and author of an Amazon bestseller, Future Proof, Reinventing Work in the Age of Acceleration, Diana is uniquely qualified to address these issues today. Via her coaching, writing, consulting, and speaking, she helps executives reinvent business and prepare for the future of work, leading to success in a fast-changing world. Diana equips entrepreneurs, CEOs, and board directors with proactive methodologies to enhance their leadership agility, influence, productivity, collaboration, and resilience in the face of constant change. So without further ado, let me invite Diana to give us some remarks on today's topic.
Thank you so much, Albert. Sorry, I definitely have to shorten my bio. And thank you, Helen and the HKUST team for inviting me here to talk about future-proofing. My book came out in January of last year, and it was because of signals in the market, really tech, globalization, and demographics. And fast forward, a year and a little bit, I think that I have gone from trying to convince people that disruption is the new normal to like everybody trying to catch up with the disruption that's already happened in the last couple of months. So I'm pleased to be here and looking forward to the conversation. I have a lot of friends at HKUST, and I know the Dean shares my passion for future of work. And so I'm looking forward to that. So I have a few slides, and they're really to set the context in terms of what we're going to talk about, have some nice pictures that will appeal to those of you visually inclined, and then have a conversation about what we can glean or what we can really do in terms of our careers and our businesses going forward. And then we'll take questions from the audience. So let me share my screen first. All right, can you see my screen? Awesome. So this is the Future Proofing book. It, as Albert has already said, he's given you a bit of background from me. Just in terms of the why I'm doing Future Proof. I am a corporate person. I am one of you. I graduated from Columbia Business School in 1997. And spent most of my career managing disruption, from being the 20-something-year-old person in consulting who was dealing with clients when everybody wanted to know whether or not they should have a website or how things would transform through ERP systems, up until today. A couple of years ago, I was at Financial Times and reinvented as a best-selling author, a professor. I teach board behavior, interpersonal dynamics, and leadership, an advisor, and a bit of an accidental futurist. One of the skills we'll go into later is really about how you can start looking for signals in the market. And as somebody who has to manage disruption, which is now everyone's at least part-time job, I think it's an important practice to think about. You can't leave it to somebody else. And then since then, I've just built up my story via TEDx talks and paid keynotes, etc. So my why is really, after doing this, realizing that some of the things that I learned are going to give other people agency over their careers for the long term. So being able to understand some of what they're about and articulate it and look at the world of work in a different way. My impression is, or my assumption, and it may be wrong, is that a lot of people who have gone through the MBA process are fantastically goal-oriented, and we've all done really well for ourselves. But times are a-changing. So the world is changing based on the drivers I mentioned, right? We have technology, which over the years has been incredibly disruptive, both from the way that it disrupts the way we work, the products we work on, the business models that we work on, or the business models for our company. And the top line really underneath is about, the specifics. So demographics is changing in terms of our careers. We now have multiple careers. They're very rarely in the same company, let alone the same function. And aging is a reality, as people 65 and over are one of the fastest growing parts of the workforce today. And they will make up an ever-growing percentage. And then aging is also an opportunity in terms of products in the silver economy. For globalization, we experience that via mobility and maybe having to move for a job if we work for a multinational, virtual teams, remote work. having to deal with multiple cultures in our teams. But then on the bottom, there's a lot of the more macro aspects, which I talk about often when I do work with boards in terms of mega trends that they need to understand in order to do their best work, which is things like transparency, which technology has accelerated, the resource stress from an ever-growing marketplace, and the and demographics in terms of population, and then globalization. Economic interconnection is a huge trend that we're grappling with, and certainly for us here, it largely plays out around the U.S.-China relationship. So this is a chart that's basically, a juicy graphic about how we are living longer and the pace of change is accelerating. And truly within our lifetimes, the paradigm shifts are frankly dizzying. Now, you could probably put the COVID virus in there around Internet of Things, and you could put the Spanish flu. I think it's helpful to think of the other pandemics like Spanish flu, or maybe HIV/AIDS, or H1N1 or SARS, because they haven't changed the march of technology, but certainly there's, we probably have to go 3D on the graphic to get the biological implications, but certainly you can see that the pace is accelerating in terms of what we have to deal with. So back to the future of work and what it means for our careers, some of the trends that are affecting how you personally feel in your careers are things like Black Swan events, the sense that we need to be able to be more resilient and maybe even anti-fragile, as Nassim Taleb would say, growing from the disruptions that we have and experience. The idea that lifelong learning is a requirement. So many of the things that you learn now, and that certainly that I learned in business school, have changed. We were doing all things digital media because I was really interested in that, and I learned to code in Emacs. Well, that's not a really useful skill anymore. We'll all have multiple jobs and careers. There's statistics that say that the lifespan of most companies is declining. If you look at, for instance, the S&P 500, the lifespans there have declined. A lot of the big companies 60 years ago on any stock market have profoundly changed. So now you see, for instance, the big tech companies having the biggest market caps. Globalization requires new soft skills. I would say that we are in a better position than many of the people that I grew up with maybe in high school in America, in terms of being in a place where we interact quite often with people from different cultures. But even moving job to job will require you to have and adapt to new cultures. So the 10 plus years I spent at Financial Times will be very different if I go to GE or to a local company like Swire. The culture is going to be fundamentally different. It might even be different between teams within one company. So learning to live with robots at all levels, I think that's a kind of a fun image for some people and terrifying for others. If any of you have seen our local homegrown Hanson Robotics, Sophia, who sort of looks like a person in the front, but has a sort of open head in the back, that's all robot. That is the good visual, but the reality is you are already living with your smartphone. You are already living with many automated processes. If you use Slack, for instance, or even if you use email reminders, the processes as far back as 30 years ago have already been changing and being automated with those big ERP systems from Oracle or SAP, which are things like the expenses system and other things. So what does this all mean? It kind of falls into AQ. AQ is the new important Q. IQ is intelligence. if you have been at HKUST, you've already ticked that box. EQ is emotional intelligence. And that is something that in the last couple of years or decades has been important. It was introduced by Daniel Goleman. And now AQ is your adaptability quotient. So you can be smart and you can be empathetic and understand people, but you also have to be quite adaptable. So a lot of people ask about what the skills will be of the future. And I think that in part, I put this up, it's from the OECD. It's a standard of skills for the 21st century. This is not for executive leaders. This is for kind of everybody, K through 12 to all the way up. So, but it is something that people reference a lot. So I think if you're gonna think about it, and they're very broad, right? I think that in my book, the 4 main categories were for your career: reinvention, experimentation, collaboration, and focus. These competencies and foundational literacies help to guide us, but ultimately, you know, the devil is in the details. This is from the Institute of the Future and gets a little bit more granular. And I thought it would be useful, since you can have the slides after the presentation, to have you look at the different drivers. So some of them are extreme longevity. Others are new media ecology. And then you can see that there are some key skills that you might think about in terms of social intelligence, cognitive load management. Cognitive load management is a really fancy word for something we discussed at an economist conference last year, which was being always on, being overloaded with information, not having actually been taught, or even as a person, or even as a group or as a leader in terms of your team, what can we do to ease these processes? What kind of boundaries do we put in place to do our best work? When do we use technology and when do we not? So how do we weather this disruption? And I say this disruption, and I'm talking about COVID, but I'm also talking about the general state of the age of acceleration and disruption that I talk about in my book, which was written before COVID. And really some of the key aspects that you have that may seem self-evident, but you might not have thought as much about them, is confidence to flex and change in a crisis. This is 2 parts, right? You could change reluctantly with much whining in a crisis, or you could hide under your desk, but developing the muscle of putting yourself out of your comfort zone in order to have confidence when crisis hits is really important. And doing things that put you out of your comfort zone in smaller ways is important. Getting stronger under stress. In my opinion, the easiest, quickest way to do that is to learn from it. So to be self-reflective. When I teach the Financial Times Board Director diploma, we have a learning log, and people identify what they're trying to do, and then they write that down, and they actually do that at the board meeting, and then they reflect on how that's going to be, how useful it was, how effective, and then how they're going to change their approach afterwards. Monitor and build capabilities to act quickly. This is really being able to have things in place to pivot. So the nice thing for Hong Kong about COVID is that we were able to act quickly because many people here have been through SARS. So being able to build capabilities in your career is being able to pivot if you're a leader, if you need to do something within your business. And some of it is having some of those really important skills. Some of them are soft skills. So in a transition, people who might need to invest in their communication skills could do that. It might be a technical thing. So the great thing about this particular disruption is, I'm sure we've all massively gone up the learning curve in terms of remote work, so that if there's another crisis, we really have those capabilities to act quickly and go to a remote working situation. Effective communication and documentation. This is about being effective at communicating and documenting some of your workflows. This is really more for leaders, but it could be for you yourself if that's helpful in terms of your routine. And it's about being very clear. So as this crisis unfolds, what I've noticed is that companies who know and leaders who know exactly what their team process has been and can adapt it and document it and communicate that are succeeding more. And then a focus on the long game. I think that having a understanding of your values and your legacy going forward is really useful, and not just reacting to the crisis of the day. So I wanted to bring some trends in from new green shoots, and these are from really future-oriented newsletters, kind of an amalgamation. Trends, green shoots from COVID for you to be thinking about when you think about what you might want to do if you're thinking about your career. What are the things that might affect that? Your business and your career. So I think one of them, these are the positive, these are the green shoots, not the brown, withering shoots, but scientists, engineers, and domain experts are getting a better seat at the table. So that can be a really good opportunity for those people who are focused on that and want to also lead and have that seat at the table. It's also a good opportunity for translators, people who find themselves in positions of translating between people and processes, or business and experts, that kind of thing that I think is actually going to be more in demand as we go forward. In the Institute of the Future, you saw the skill of sense making, and that is one of the skills that a translator performs. Another is the global collective technology assisted rapid response, which has been enabled. So that's going to, it might be short term or it might be long term. It's certainly a trend that could be really positive if we can capitalize on that. Modernize or improve government, healthcare, education. Now that we've moved to something that's more low cost and high efficiency, these are all industries ripe for disruption. So I think that, certainly those are interesting things to watch if you're inside them, and certainly if you're an investor or thinking about other industries you might want to consider. Job reallocation, helping people find jobs best suited to their skills and lifestyle, and the training to get them there. I think as leaders that's incumbent upon us all. I think that is something that there are a lot of people working on. I'm part of a global shift council that's trying to atomize the skills that go into work so as to smooth those transitions and understand the training. I think we need to do more of that in Hong Kong and elsewhere. More considered consumption, that's a real question to me. Will we go back to buying everything that we were before this, or will we decide to slow down? And that is fundamentally, and Albert and I can talk about this later, something about growth. And what I see more and more happening, which is a conversation about, is it important to grow or is it important to thrive? And if it is not important to grow the economy or perpetually grow your business, then what does that mean for your work? We have been taught to look for growth and, and have that be an engine of our own careers. If there are places where we don't want growth collectively as a society, or if the business just can't grow because it's really mature, is something to think about for your career. And then Mary Meeker, who began as an internet analyst and said in her latest report that we entered this time at business highs but social lows globally. and a deeply fragmented society. And in order for things to go forward, truly, I think that it's not something that we can paper over or overlook. I don't have answers. I just think it's, it would be remiss not to mention that. So how to future-proof for yourself? I think that one thing that we spend a lot of time, I have my book, but I also have a future-proof course for people who are making that path from where they are in terms of their career and something very linear to making progress on their own values and goals and new careers, often reinvention. So self-awareness is something that we do quite a bit. It takes a bit of time. Most of the time, we are just desperately busy and running to catch up. And it's about really taking a step back and thinking, okay, I'm gonna have a longer life. What do I wanna do with it? Many people have gotten to a place and are at a, wondering, is this it? So developing some of that self-awareness to know what you want to do in the more seasoned aspect of your career, if that's where you are. Future foresight, as I mentioned, this is something I think is really important. It's something that tends to be left for the other people who have time, and it does take time. So when I talk to people who are in product development and they say, oh yeah, we have one of those people who thinks about the future, but it's a different brain space, right? It's the one, I have to build the product and I don't have time to think about in 10 years how people might live and consume the products that we make at the bank. So it is something that I understand takes some a creative space, but it's a muscle that you can practice. And ultimately it's to benefit you, right? It's about thinking about what's gonna happen in 2030, how can I align and experiment to ensure I have the right skills and competencies to be relevant at that time. And I think that that is something that we do. We write future headlines and we think about the small steps in the Future Proof course. Having a clear brand promise. This is the answer to what's your story? Who are you? What value do you bring? And how does that change at multiple points of your career and for different people you work with? So the people that I talk to when I'm teaching MBAs are different, and the value that I bring to them is different than when I'm going into the World Bank and talking to the board. And being able to know what the core of that is, but then what value I can provide to the different groups I serve is really important. Having a strategic network, we have all gone up the performance reviews. I guess if you've been an entrepreneur from day one, maybe not, but there is talk about how professional loyalty now flows to the horizontal rather than to the vertical corporate hierarchy. It changes in different countries, but you can see this, it's global. You can see it with LinkedIn. You can see it with smaller networks of people based on industry. You can see it in terms, I can see it in terms of the projects that I get. I can see it in terms of actual board positions that I get that have been gotten by our Financial Times alumni based on LinkedIn or other networks for boards. And I think that that kind of quality assurance and sharing is going to be really important for people to develop proactively, not just wait until they need to. And then, of course, having a high adaptability quotient. So that is it for me. I welcome you to be in contact with me by email or WhatsApp or one of the social media aspects, and certainly on LinkedIn where I am most, but I'd love to turn it over to Albert and have a conversation about the questions that you have and that he has going forward. So.
Great. Thank you, Diana. So I want to remind the audience that if you have questions, please write them in the chat function, and I'll be monitoring that and try to incorporate them into the conversation. So there's one message I got, Diana, which I'll start with. Paul Lau asks, what is the must-learn hard skills that will better equip us to embrace the new world of robots? And let me piggyback on this question because as an economist, we often think that there are kind of returns to specialization, that people should focus on what they're good at. In your presentation, you showed us the OECD scheme of all of these different skills we need to know, going from the technological literacy all the way to the soft skills of grit and cultural awareness. And so I wonder what you think about as we plan our careers, how much we'd be thinking that we can be a specialist, or we should be a generalist, or we can choose these sets of skills. And in particular with technology so much at the forefront, is there a minimum level of hard training we need to really function properly in a highly advanced technological world?
Thank you, Albert, and thank you, Paul, for the question. And it's this chicken or egg debate. And I will tell you that, in fact, one of my friends, Monir, who's head of HR at Gojek in Indonesia, we have this fight fairly often. And there are some technical skills, and some people who are expert. And I think that those have a shelf life. So I don't think that, those people who have that expertise is that's going to go away, right? I think that that expertise now has a shorter shelf life. So if you are studying AI and you have a very specific part of it, if you are not perpetually upgrading your knowledge of AI and the application of your knowledge to real world situations, then that can be a problem. Likewise, I think that being able to have some fairly basic soft skills so that you can communicate your ideas is important. I was thinking about that because, Albert, we spoke about it earlier, and just before this, I thought, I'm looking at my 3 kids and thinking, the average person can't look at those 2 things. I could do like really deep technical work and expertise, or I could, go for soft skills. Like most people have, one or the other that that they lean towards. So I think that you will have people that will be able to go deep into the very technical skills, and companies and often people surrounding them and leaders are developing processes to let us all do our best work, right? So I think that there's some double-digit percentage of people at Google that are in the Google engineering, cache that are on the spectrum. So they have, really developed processes for people to do the best work that they have, and also to be able to communicate that across different departments, across to different people. And some of it has to do with the translators that I talked about. So that is a whole category that has been there forever. When I worked at Time Warner in the mid-90s, there was the hardcore geeks in the closet with the headphones on and their EDM music. And then there was the CEO and the business people. And I think that, oftentimes those don't mix, but there are people who have enough interdisciplinary understanding that they can be a connecting point between those 2 things. And so those people are often the soft skill people, the ones that have invested in being able to communicate and invested in being able to translate between even not just people and people, but machines and people. So there's whole studies being done at places like MIT about how that human-machine interface can be smoothed. So yes, I think that generally speaking, when people are in transition, let's say you lose your job and you're not sure if you want to go and take the online AI course or invest in your communication skills or, do coaching, then that's sort of a binary choice. And I would say that most people will do a bit of both. but you will go towards what your skills are, but understand that, that you need to have a bit of both, but expertise. That's the idea of the T-shaped, what they call the T-shaped expertise, which is you have breadth, but maybe expertise in one. Now people are talking about having the X-shaped expertise, where you have a sort of broad range and you have expertise in a number of them that you combine together.
Right.
I hope that answers the question.
That's great. We have some more questions coming in. So Brian is asking, do you have any advice on how you can build your own strategic network other than just using social media like LinkedIn?
I have a lot of advice about it, and we spent 2 weeks on it in our Future Proof course, and it's really starting with the outcomes you want to obtain. And those don't have to be the same from year to year. But for example, if I'm looking to build a strategic network because I'm going into something new, then the audience that I have, if it's for a job, might be CEOs or HR leaders, or it might be influencers in that space. And those are the people that I will start to cultivate and have conversations with and learn from. So that's a fairly common one. Reinventing yourself. You know, maybe you've been in sales forever and you want to do something else. Maybe you've been in media for a long time and want to build the bridge towards something new. So thinking about the outcome, thinking about then the audience, and then thinking about what you want them to know about you, and what kind of conversations you might want to have. It's not transactional. You can't say, I want to know Albert PARK because I want to know everything about economics, and reach out to him and become best friends immediately. But certainly it's something to think about, and people don't do it very strategically. Outside of social media, lots of people aren't on social media. Then you can meet in person, or you used to be able to meet in person. Being able to know the 5 people, or maybe even 2 or 3 people that you think would be really beneficial, that you could learn from, or that you can provide value to, is a good way to start. And even understanding what kind of person you are, if you're the person that has a coffee or the person who gets on stage for 2,000 people. Those are similar network activities, but completely different personalities that would go forward with them. I can't hear you, Albert. I can't hear you, Albert. Are you on mute?
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
So we have another question from Sif. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. He's asking, when companies are assessing the skills of potential employees, how can they assess whether you have this AQ that you think is so important, this adaptive quotient, and how can you signal to employers that you have those qualities?
That is a great question, and one I've never had before. So thank you, Steve. So I've been really curious about that for my next book, which is about how companies are starting to do that in Future Proof. First of all, I think that the AQ that you need is for you, first of all, and secondly, for companies. So thinking about it in terms of managing your own career and volatility is important. In terms of companies, I've had a lot of companies who say, I want our employees to be more entrepreneurial, more adaptable, and more resilient. And oftentimes that's why they hire me to go and speak and talk about that. Some of the ways that they do that is by asking you how you think about a situation. So not incredibly different in terms of the process, but they will see when you are able to bounce back from a situation. So there's much more on a very practical level, many more questions that are coming up about tell me about a challenge you had, tell me about how you overcame it. And they're looking for your thought process. And of course, nobody's going to say, I hid under the desk because it was really daunting. But they will want to know that you looked through various options, that you understood that there was a process to choose the best one, that you had criteria that was well thought out for your decisions, that if you're a leader, that you considered the other people that might be affected or need to be pulled along in terms of that change. So I think that is one way. That's a sort of leadership answer. And I think that on the other side is the understanding that you are looking forward. So for a lot of MBAs, for instance, I did a survey when I was at Financial Times, and they said a lot of MBAs, and granted this was 15 years ago, a lot of MBAs are technically proficient, be it corporate finance or whatnot, but they lack the ability to talk about where the vision, the ability to talk about where they think the future is headed. And most MBAs might think, I'm like, who am I to say? You're the leader. But I can say, and I'm sure many people on this call will agree, that they're really interested in the perspective of people who have new ideas, who have a new perspective, and who are the next generation's leaders. So being able to even put yourself out there and say, I've thought about it. I've thought about where this industry is headed. And I think that these are some interesting ideas to discuss or consider is really important.
Great. I think kind of a related question, so let me insert it here. Marquetta is wondering how you would recommend us to articulate the EQ skills we have. So we're working our way across the skills. She says it's quite challenging compared to hard skills results, which you can show people very easily. How do you show people your EQ skills?
Well, so I feel like collaboration is a really important skill, more so than before. If you're lucky enough to be an absolute genius in one thing that doesn't require any other people, then you probably can go about your work and somebody else will figure out how to translate your ideas to other people. But as somebody who's been in a management position and needs to get a team to work together and has done that across many countries, I think that collaboration is important, but I was always curious how people tested for that. And the way that they're doing it, and it relates to your question about EQ, is first of all, I'll give you an example of MIT. So for their entrepreneurship program, when they were testing people for application, for admission, they would actually have the people do a hackathon, or they'd have the people do a project, a group project. And the interesting thing is that they wouldn't pick the person who was a natural leader, that one person who always comes and says, I'll be the spokesperson. They would really watch them and they would see who was the person that was ensuring that every person's participation was input, or who is the person that was, ensuring that they had explored all possible options. And those are some of the things that they were looking for. And those were the people they picked for admission, which I thought was fascinating and very different than when I grew up, where, to my benefit, the person with the loudest voice often got picked. But fast forward to consulting. So I asked one of the big four consulting companies, how did they figure out who are the good team players? And even for boards, that's one of the things that people look for. Who is a good team player, who's not about ego, who can come in? And again, they interview them in groups, or they ask them to do a project, and they ask them to, and they observe and they see what kind of people are really having an outcome that's more than the sum of its parts. And those are the people, because in consulting, it's such a team environment, those are the people that they want to come, because you can have good ideas, but if you railroad them in a team setting, or if you don't listen to other people and take those ideas into consideration, then it can be a real issue. So those are some of the ways that people are looking at it. And in terms of your EQ, truly pick 3 stories that demonstrate a time when you used your emotional intelligence to solve a problem, or to have a positive outcome for your company, and make that part of your pitch in your interview.
Great advice. We have another question asking for more advice. So you talk about brand promise, and the question from Alvin is, can you give us some advice on how to develop brand promise?
That's a pretty general question, but yes, again, we spend a lot of time on it. If you want to do it in a superficial way, you can think about the things that people say about you. And this is Jeff Bezos, that basically your personal brand is what people say about you when you leave the room. I like to think about it a little more positively, which is what can you tell people that's easy to digest, that will allow them to introduce you to jobs or projects or people that you would find interesting and profitable in the future. So if you tell me something about the work that you do, or the person you are, I can go and say to somebody, yes, Helen Chen at HKUST is one of the most generous, well-networked people I know. And if you want anything done and done with creativity and enthusiasm, go to her. And maybe that's not the brand that she picked out for herself. And if she doesn't like it, she better work on her personal brand. But I think that the other work that we do that's really much deeper is to think about your values and how that shows up in your work, and then go on to articulate, who you want to be seen as and how that makes sense in terms of of your work, right? So I hope that that's helpful. Truly, 1 sentence or 2 sentences. In our Future Proof course, we make people do that, a personal brand statement. They have to put it into our private Facebook group, and they actually have feedback from people who are not their colleagues, who already know what they do, and they're not their grandmas who already have no idea and never will know what they do, and they're not your friends who fill in all the blanks. So you have people saying, well, I don't understand, or what do you want to get out of this? Or you're selling yourself short. Why don't you talk about the fact that you went to this school or this client that you used? Because that's great social proof.
Great. Shifting gears a little bit, Leo asked, this is a more personal question. Can you share a turning point in your life that had an impact on you? Maybe somebody told you something that you wished you had known earlier, or you found a truth that was opposite to what most people told you.
Leo?
Yes.
Leo, this is the story of my life. Almost all the time that I have done things and been surprised about the fact that nobody told me earlier, I feel compelled to share that with other people. I think that there's one thing that really stands out. And if you want to know about a turning point in my life, then you can go watch the TEDx Wan Chai talk that I did, because that's a pretty big one. But one of the things that comes up is my father, who was the first person in his family to go to college. And he went on full ride to Stanford University and then to Stanford Medical School. And he told me when I was starting out that the best way for me to get ahead was to work harder than anyone else. And I have done that to the best of my abilities for many years. And the thing that I wish I'd known is that is a really good thing for somebody to do in their 20s. And that there is this sort of pivot point where you have to start using your wisdom and working smarter and prioritizing, because harder is not strategic, and it's not going to get you necessarily the things that you deserve, and it's not going to be appreciated. You know, it'll be extra work. It'll be 150% to get you to 95% instead of your typical 80-20. So that is one thing that comes to mind when you ask that question. Otherwise, you can go watch the TEDx and tell me what you think.
So Diana, I had a question about whether you think there's a difference between future-proofing individual careers versus future-proofing organizations, so that organizations can be effective in rapidly changing environments.
Thank you, Albert. I love that question. And I just did a presentation for the YPO Hong Kong Gold, some of which have huge companies, but Raymond Kwok was on that call, I think. And so I have been researching that, and between some of the scholars at Harvard Business School and some of the different research I've looked at, it's really a sea change. We have been, in the last couple decades, really focused on efficiency, right? The big things. And I adored Nelson Freeman, who's my operations professor, and all of the things I learned in operations class seemed like, you know, aha moments to me. And now he runs the Deming Center at Columbia. But times are changing, and the COVID virus was fascinating because it showed us that our drive for efficiency had left very little flexibility in the system, be it supply chain, be it people, et cetera. So some of the research that people have been doing when they talk about, okay, then what? You know, how will this change how we go forward? Some of it is building in redundancy. And I think that that's important for a company. It's shown to be now more important. And I do kind of think it's important, at least for me, maybe as a person, to build in a little more redundancy, considering the amount of stress and how busy we all seem to be. Experimentation, being able to experiment and tinker and learn, is something that companies have to figure out. They have to do it, and they have to figure out how they're going to do it. So as the innovation person in a company, you know, Clayton Christensen talked about the innovator's dilemma. And when I was growing up in innovation, there was always this tiny little group of geeks on the side that were not allowed or not supposed to talk to the business people, and they were supposed to have the big ideas. That trend has gone away, and now innovation is more in-house. And so thinking about how you can experiment at the margins so that you can understand the risk that might come your way, but also the opportunities. And that's why companies actually like the idea of a professional loyalty, you know, a sort of horizontal network that you can bring into a company, because then you know what's coming, not just within the company, but outside of it, provided you are smart about that and, you know, don't talk too much about what's going on in your company. So one of them was to mitigate that is avoid risks that if lost would kill you. And that's something from some Harvard Business School research. It seems pretty obvious, but there has been in the past this sense of, if we're going to innovate, it's like go big or go home, right? We're gonna pivot to be an entirely online university. If that doesn't work, you are not going to be in a good place. You know, if you sort of sell the building and go all digital. So I think that avoiding those kind of risks, or taking bets that you can unwind if they turn out not to be a great idea, are important. Choosing data wisely is one that is not new, but I think that it's something that people are consumed by. And that certainly in terms of skills of the future, having a good sense of data, when to use it, how the human judgment interacts with the data that comes, how to design a system, and key measures, for instance. That's a big deal in the future, and future-proofing an organization. Having optionality in a business, and then I think what doesn't work is as important as what does. And I think that we don't do that as much in Asia culturally as they might in Silicon Valley, and certainly Hong Kong. I remember talking to one of the people in government about the fact that we need to learn more about what doesn't work and why, in addition to always trying to find what does work.
Right. Yeah, I really agree. I mean, in just the past 15 years, we've had the great financial crisis, trade war, COVID. So these crises, they change, but they keep coming. And so I think businesses and government institutions and policies are definitely going to start focusing more on resilience and insurance and safety and equity than pure efficiency, which has really been the driving.
Yeah, guns and butter. Well, to a certain extent, your question in the beginning about specialization is similar. We specialized because it was efficient, you know, and so if efficiency is not the primary goal, then what is, and how does that affect careers? So it's an interesting question. And then linking that with the fact that we have always assumed growth in companies, and a lot of our careers have been tied to helping a company grow. If we decide that some places, you know, or sectors don't need to grow, you know, A, who decides that? And B, what does that mean for our careers?
Right. So we have another question from Helen. She's curious for you to elaborate a bit more on this point that scientists, engineers, and experts are going to have a better seat at the table.
Well, I have to say that is, I guess, debatable. I think that this is the green shoot. This is the thing that could make a big difference. And I think it depends on where you are. So as an American, I think that's it's a sort of hopeful thing. I've been in Hong Kong 20 years, but just looking at the interplay of and the rise and fall of science within the United States, you can see that that sometimes it's an appreciated, has an appreciated seat at the table, and sometimes it doesn't. And but elsewhere around the world, there's been a sense that business leaders have really driven things forward. And it's been about infrastructure building and, you know, and about capitalism and building big businesses. And I think that scientists and other disciplines just have a new framework to bring to those conversations, be it biologists who are now really thinking about, you know, how ecosystems grow and how viruses grow, and you know what that means in terms of how we set up our businesses and our, you know, ecosystems, and what kind of risks there are that might threaten those things.
I think sitting at a university, we all feel that, of course, scientists and experts should have a seat at the policy table. I mean, that just seems sensible. And so maybe what COVID is revealing is what happens when you don't follow what really should be obvious in many of these systems, where you let politics and you ignore, and we're doing it still with climate change and many other threats. And COVID may prove to be a metaphor, really, that through which many people will learn, hopefully, about changing the way we value these characteristics of our leadership. But time will tell, I guess. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope time will tell, and it will be a good story to tell. So
one last question I had was, it's easy to say, you know, once things happen that, oh, now we're developing our capacity to go online and that will make us more able to deal with this in the future. But if you thought back before it happened, should we have been investing in online? Should we have been doing things without even knowing that COVID would have happened or other things would have happened? And it makes me think of this, you know, what's happened in the US where with all of the unemployment claims going through the roof, a lot of state unemployment offices just couldn't process so many claims because they were using softwares that were 40 years old. They just hadn't updated. And so they were getting like retired people who knew those languages because no one young knew those languages to help. And so it seems like even without knowing the nature of the future risks or uncertainties, there's this huge premium to just staying current or really pushing the technological capabilities and flexibilities all the time. Otherwise, it'll be costly, it'll be too late kind of if you have to, or much more costly if you have to adopt these things after the fact, as opposed to.
Yeah. Well, I think I can understand the sense people have of being overwhelmed by the need to upgrade. Most of the places that were caught out weren't entirely surprised that they were caught out, right? It's not like nobody noticed that the systems were 40 years old. It's just that they decided it wasn't a priority. And likewise for businesses, you see here in Hong Kong, you know, businesses who are still sending bills manually, they're printing them out, they're sending them through the mail to other companies where there's nobody who's there to open and receive them. And they haven't digitized that process, so they can't collect money for their cash flow. And you can bet that conversation was had. We should really move to the cloud, or maybe we put in a whole system, but nobody's actually using it, or whatever it is. You know that those conversations happened for a lot of businesses. And I think that this just accelerated the urgency of it and accelerated the need for it. Most people on an individual level, myself included, feel overwhelmed by the idea that, oh, maybe I should know more about data science. What should I know more about data science? And should I also know Zoom? And if I know Zoom and we switch to Blue Jeans, and like, there's everything that you could possibly learn. And I think that my advice in that respect is to have a balance. So you're always having some things that you can push yourself outside of your comfort zone and be learning new things, and they're specific and intentional, and you reflect on whether or not it's useful and if you are even interested in it. But also hold some of those things for which you have some mastery that are, you know, sometimes a relief because they don't involve thinking all over again about how to do something. And so I think that that's something that people are trying to manage as, there's a lot of people who are like, you know, I can do my job in my sleep. And those people need to go and find some interesting ways to push themselves, because when you push yourself outside your comfort zone, it's uncomfortable. You don't know what's going to happen, but it's a muscle that you build. And then when the thing happens that you don't want to have happen, that you don't expect, you have the confidence, you know you can do it, and you just have the ability even to change. It's the ability to change almost as much as the ability to know how to download XYZ video software.
So we're almost at the end of our session. I wonder, Diana, if you have any final words or thoughts you want to leave the audience with before we close.
So one perspective that I have found quite useful as I go forward, and maybe Leo, this is related to your question about what do you wish you knew? We are in a place where oftentimes based on our families and our culture and, you know, pop culture or whatever, we are given what we're supposed to do. And I would just say, don't settle for what you were given. the expectations you're given. If you really want to succeed, go out and work hard for the thing you want. So that's something that I try to live by, and I find that it's a message that people need to hear as they feel afraid of the uncertainty. The reality is we will have to work harder to find out what it is that we want to do, and really think about it, and then really put our shoulder to the wheel and work hard to do well and contribute to society as well.
Great. Thank you. And I want to thank Diana for leading such a interesting and I think helpful conversation for all of us. And at this point, I want to turn it back to Helen to offer a few concluding remarks.
Well, I just have so much enrichment through our session today, and I hope you enjoy as much as I did. Thank you to Professor Park and also our wonderful speaker, Diana Wood-David, and for all the great food for thought. And I wanted to say that, we'd love to hear from you for our future webinars and our current webinar, and also your advice for future webinars. And we have a QR code on screen, and if you could scan and kind of fill out a simple survey, that would be wonderful. They'll help us to create better contents for you in the future. If you have any further questions or queries, feel free to email us as sbmalum, one word, @ust.hk.